Imagine for a second that you are about to sign a contract. But this isn't for a new cell phone plan or like a car lease.
Right.
You are signing a contract to build a $2 billion petrochemical plant.
Yeah, a massive commitment.
Exactly. We are talking about a massive, sprawling industrial complex with miles of piping, towering cooling silos, and literally thousands of workers.
Huge scale.
But now imagine you blink, right? 5 years pass, and suddenly you are completely out of money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The factory doesn't actually produce a single usable drop of chemicals, and the international contractor you hired has legally packed up, dissolved their local subsidiary, and just left the country.
Which is, I mean, that's the ultimate nightmare scenario.
It really is.
Yeah.
You are left holding this rusting billion-dollar paperweight. So the question is, how do you prevent that from happening? Well, in 1988, the United Nations actually tried to answer that exact question. They published a document called the UNCITRAL Legal Guide on drawing up international contracts for the construction of industrial works.
Which, admittedly, sounds like a document designed specifically to cure insomnia.
It really does. It sounds so dry.
It does. But when you actually dive into the mechanics of this guide, it reveals itself as this masterful, highly strategic playbook. I mean, it's basically a survival guide for navigating the really treacherous waters of industrial megaprojects.
Right.
Whether that's a fertilizer plant, a hydroelectric dam, or a steel mill. It teaches you how to do it without getting completely taken to the cleaners.
Right. And the history behind why this playbook even exists is it's a massive piece of the puzzle here. We really have to look back at the 1970s and 80s to understand the sheer desperation driving it.
Absolutely.
Like, the UN was heavily focused on resolutions for a new international economic order. You had dozens of developing nations trying to rapidly industrialize. They had the raw materials, but they desperately needed the actual infrastructure to process them and, boost their economies.
But the problem was, sitting across the negotiating table from them were some of the most dominant, highly experienced multinational corporations in the entire world.
Right.
And these developing nations, they were often acting through government ministries or like newly formed state enterprises. They were navigating these billion-dollar waters for the very first time.
Total mismatch.
Exactly. They were up against contractors armed with literal armies of lawyers, decades of historical pricing data, and a deep, deep understanding of how to exploit contract loopholes. The balance of power was just incredibly skewed.
Yeah.
So the UN Commission on International Trade Law stepped in to arm the little guy, the purchaser, with the legal architecture and the strategic foresight to level that playing field.
And the strategies they developed are incredibly universally applicable. Like, even if you aren't planning to construct a hydroelectric dam tomorrow, the architecture of this 1988 guide is just a masterclass in risk allocation.
It really is.
The way they identify where a project can fail and how they write contracts to legally force the alignment of incentives, it applies directly to, say, negotiating a complex corporate merger or managing an enterprise-wide software deployment.
Or even just hiring a contractor for a major home renovation without getting scammed,
Right. The underlying logic is always the same. You have to define reality before you build, figure out how much risk you can actually afford to absorb, and then build these psychological and financial traps to keep your vendors honest.
Yeah, you have to lock them in.
So before we even look at a contract, the guide insists on this exhaustive phase of what they call pre-contract studies. You don't just sketch a factory on a napkin and ask for bids.
No, definitely not.
The inception phase is broken down into a very specific hierarchy, starting with opportunity studies.
Yeah, and those are really the broad brushstrokes.
Yeah.
So a government might look at a massive, newly discovered deposit of natural gas and just ask the macroeconomic questions.
Like, does this even make sense?
Exactly. Could we manufacture nitrogen fertilizer here? Is there domestic demand, or would we need to export it? You are simply establishing if the concept is worth a second glance, and if it is, then you move to the preliminary feasibility studies.
Which acts as a relatively cheap sanity check, right? You want to spot the massive, insurmountable red flags before you commit millions of dollars to a full engineering review.
Yes, and assuming it passes that preliminary check, you commission the heavy hitter, the full feasibility study.
Right.
This is where the really granular analysis happens. You are mapping the exact site topography, testing the bedrock, calculating the 20-year projections for raw material supplies. You're mapping the local power grid's capacity. And crucially, the guide emphasizes sensitivity studies at this stage.
Which is where you're basically stress testing the business model. You want to know what happens to your profit margin if, say, the cost of raw materials spikes by 20% in year 3.
Right. Or if a drought cuts your hydroelectric power supply in half.
Yeah, you need to know the failure points before you lay a single brick.
Exactly. And finally, you commission the detailed studies, which generates the refined technical data required to actually draft the blueprints. But the guide issues a really stark warning here. Purchasers who try to save time or money by rushing these pre-contract studies, they almost always pay exponentially more later.
Oh, I bet.
Because if your bedrock data is wrong, you will be forced into mid-construction design changes. And mid-construction changes are where contractors make their real money.
Right, it's where initial budgets go to die. Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because if I'm a purchaser looking at the massive cost of hiring specialized geologists and engineers just to tell me if I can build, the temptation to consolidate is huge.
Oh, definitely.
So isn't it faster and cheaper to just hire the expert international contractor who is eventually going to build the plant to just do these preliminary studies for me? I mean, I'm guessing that's like asking a real estate agent if it's a good time to buy a house, right? Aren't they completely biased?
What's fascinating here is that the guide actually explicitly warns about this exact conflict of interest. It is a profound risk. A contractor has every incentive to make the feasibility study look much rosier than reality.
Right, because they want the job.
Exactly. They might downplay the environmental risks or underestimate the infrastructure costs just to convince you to greenlight the project because they know they are in line for a highly lucrative multi-year construction contract once you say yes.
So they rig the math to ensure the project actually happens.
Yeah. And in fact, international lending institutions like the World Bank, the entities actually financing these projects, they recognize this danger so clearly that they often mandate a strict separation of church and state.
Really?
Yeah, they will categorically ban the firm that provided the feasibility study from even bidding on the construction contract. The evaluation of reality must remain entirely segregated from the execution.
Unless, I suppose, the industrial process is so cutting edge and patented that literally no independent consultant even exists to evaluate it.
Right, there are rare exceptions.
But assuming you follow the rules, you've paid for the independent studies. You have objective data proving the project will be profitable. Now you actually have to figure out how to get it built. And the guide presents this sort of spectrum of risk that the purchaser can choose to take on, starting with the most common approach, which is the turnkey contract.
Right, the turnkey model. And it's appealing because of its sheer simplicity. You basically hire a single mega contractor, and they absorb the entire logistical nightmare of coordination.
Right.
They design the facility, they source the complex machinery, and they manage the construction. And when the dust settles, they just hand you the key, you turn it, and the plant theoretically starts producing.
I mean, it sounds perfect. You don't have to manage dozens of subcontractors yourself. But if they control both the design and the construction, and they won the job by submitting the lowest bid, they are heavily incentivized to cut corners, aren't they? Like when we talk about a lack of incentive to over-design, we aren't talking about, skipping the marble floors in the lobby. We are talking about stripping away the safety margins, using concrete that meets the absolute bare minimum load requirements, or installing pumps that will survive the warranty period but fail a year later, just to preserve their own profit margins.
Exactly. That is the hidden tax of a turnkey contract.
Yeah.
The contractor is going to build exactly what is legally required to pass the final inspection, and not an inch more.
Yeah.
It's like you're buying a pre-built house, but you didn't get to watch them install the plumbing behind the drywall. If you want protection against that long-term degradation, you look to the absolute other end of the risk spectrum, the product-in-hand approach.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this completely changes the definition of done. Under product in hand, the contractor doesn't just get to hand over the keys and fly home after the final coat of paint dries.
No, not at all. They're legally shackled to the facility until they prove it operates smoothly with the purchaser's own local staff running the controls.
Wow.
Yeah, the contractor must train your personnel, supervise the initial operational runs, and successfully hit the agreed-upon production quotas, say 1,000 tons of fertilizer a week, using local labor. The project isn't complete when the machine turns on. It is complete when the purchaser achieves total operational independence.
But wait, if product in hand guarantees the plant will actually work with my own team and guarantees that my domestic workforce will be fully trained, why would anyone ever choose turnkey? Why wouldn't every single developing nation demand this model?
Well, because you have to pay for the risk you are forcing the contractor to absorb.
Ah.
In a product-in-hand contract, the builder is basically betting their profit margin on factors completely outside their core competency of engineering. They are betting on the ability of the purchaser's local staff to learn highly complex industrial chemistry.
Right.
They are taking on the risk of local labor strikes or language barriers during training. Because that risk profile is so terrifying for a builder, they charge a colossal premium. It is the gold standard for safety, but it requires incredibly deep pockets.
Which means if you don't have the cash for that premium, you are forced into a much more dangerous game.
Exactly.
Let's say a turnkey contract is too expensive, or perhaps the developing nation's government mandates that a certain percentage of the project budget must be spent on local domestic businesses to boost their economy. That forces the purchaser to break the massive mega project into pieces, adopting what they call the several contracts approach.
Right. This is where you might hire a specialized German firm to supply the high-pressure chemical reactors, but you contract a local domestic firm to pour the concrete foundations and build the access roads.
And beyond just boosting the local economy, this is critical for foreign exchange reserves, right? Because in the 1970s and 80s, developing nations couldn't just print US dollars or German marks.
No, they had limited reserves.
Yeah, if they drain their foreign currency reserves to pay a single international turnkey contractor, it can completely destabilize their ability to import food or medicine. So by using local contractors for the civil engineering, they can pay in their own local currency, preserving their precious foreign reserves for the specialized technology they truly can't build at home.
And the macroeconomic benefits there are massive. It allows local engineers to work alongside international experts, absorbing new skills. But the trade-off is a terrifying increase in logistical risk.
Yeah.
Because when you divide the work, the purchaser suddenly becomes the general contractor.
Hmm.
If your local civil engineering firm hits a snag and is, say, 3 months late pouring the concrete foundation, the German equipment supplier can't install their machines.
Oh, man.
And that foreign supplier will start hitting you with massive financial penalties for delaying their timeline. And the purchaser is left holding the bag for all those cascading failures.
So you are basically absorbing the coordination risk just to save money. So how does a government ministry with literally no experience building a petrochemical plant manage that kind of chaos?
Well, they utilize structural solutions, like hiring a consulting engineer or a construction manager. And this isn't just an advisor. This is a highly experienced professional entity whose sole mandate is to integrate the chaos of a dozen different contractors.
Okay.
And to ensure they actually care about your timeline, you tie their compensation directly to target costs. If they manage all the moving parts efficiently and the project comes in under budget and on time, their fee multiplies. If they allow delays and cost overruns, their fee plummets.
So you legally bind their financial success to your own. But there's a completely different way to align incentives that goes beyond just hiring managers or breaking up contracts, right? Like, alternatively, the purchaser and the contractor can form a joint venture to run the plant together after it's built.
Yes, exactly. It fundamentally rewrites the relationship dynamics. Because in a turnkey contract, the contractor is just a vendor. But in a joint venture, they are a co-owner. Because they will be sharing in the long-term profits and losses of the chemical plant. They are suddenly highly motivated to build an incredibly robust foundation.
So what does this all mean? It's kind of like the difference between hiring a wedding planner and actually marrying the person building the venue, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Like, the wedding planner just wants the party to look good until midnight so they get paid. But if you marry them, they actually have to live in the house with you. They have every incentive to make sure the plumbing actually works and the roof doesn't leak.
Exactly. Add to that the fact that a joint venture is one of the most effective vehicles for technology transfer. The foreign partner isn't going to supply outdated, obsolete machinery to a factory they own half of.
Right, they want it to succeed.
They will bring their best proprietary technology, their most rigorous training programs, and crucially, they will open up their established global marketing channels to help sell the factory's output. They want the plant to dominate the market because their own capital is locked up in it long after the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the cost of that alignment is control, isn't it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Yes.
Absolutely. A sovereign nation or a state enterprise has to swallow their pride and give up a significant degree of managerial control over a facility built on their own soil.
Yeah.
You have a partner now. You can't just unilaterally change the production line or alter the labor policies without calling a board meeting and compromising. It is a calculated sacrifice of autonomy in exchange for world-class execution and shared financial risk.
Okay, so we've mapped the risks, we know what we are building, and we've chosen our contracting structure. Now we enter the selection phase, like the Hunger Games of construction. How do you force the world's biggest construction conglomerates to offer their absolute best price without them pulling a fast one on you?
Well, the guide breaks this down into negotiation versus tendering. Negotiation is the simpler route. You identify a couple of reputable firms, invite them to the table, and just hash out the terms directly.
Right.
It is much faster and allows for flexible problem solving, but you sacrifice the immense leverage of a competitive bidding war.
Which is why open tendering is so heavily emphasized, right? And frequently it's legally required by the international lenders funding these projects just to ensure fairness. In open tendering, you advertise the project globally. You invite the free market to compete for the job.
But opening the floodgates introduces the nightmare of volume. You might receive 100 bids, including dangerously low bids from totally unqualified shell companies hoping to scam the system, win the job, get the initial deposit, and then strong-arm you for more money later.
So how do you filter them out?
To prevent that, the guide insists on a rigorous pre-qualification phase. Before you even release the technical blueprints for bidding, interested companies must fill out an exhaustive questionnaire. They have to detail their financial liquidity, their safety records, and provide a portfolio of similar projects they have successfully completed.
So you act as a ruthless bouncer at the door, weeding out the weak and the fraudulent before the real competition even begins.
Exactly. So only the verified heavyweights actually get to submit a bid. And when they do, the guide details a fascinating psychological trap called the two-envelope system.
Oh, I love this part. I assume this means exactly what it sounds like, right? They don't just hand you one massive binder. They give you two physically separate sealed envelopes. Let me guess. One envelope contains the engineering blueprints and the other contains the bill.
Exactly right. Envelope number 1 contains all the technical specifications, the engineering tolerances, the equipment sourcing, the safety protocols, and the construction timeline. There is absolutely no mention of price in this envelope.
Zero.
Envelope number 2 contains the financial bid, and the purchaser is required to open the technical envelopes first, evaluating the engineering purely on its own merits.
Because if you open a single binder and immediately see a price tag that is like $50 million cheaper than the competitor, human nature takes over.
Oh, completely.
You will subconsciously start ignoring the flaws in their engineering or downplaying the risks of their cheaper materials just to justify accepting those massive savings.
The two-envelope system isolates the technical evaluation from the financial temptation. You rank the designs based on safety, efficiency, and durability first. Only after you have established which designs are actually viable do you open the second envelopes to see what those designs will cost you. It prevents the purchaser from deceiving themselves.
That's brilliant. But there is another mechanism the guide outlines that protects the purchaser from being deceived by the contractors. It is called the tender guarantee. This requires the bidding company to submit a financial bond, actual money, just for the privilege of handing in their bid.
Yeah.
But wait, why does a company have to pay just to submit a bid? What if they just change their mind? On the surface, forcing a company to pay just to offer their services sounds incredibly hostile.
This raises an important question, and it does sound hostile, until you look at the vulnerability of the purchaser. I imagine you spend a year and millions of dollars running a global tendering process. You evaluate the two envelopes, you select a winning contractor, and the government publicly announces the partnership.
Right.
At that moment, the contractor realizes you are heavily invested and absolutely desperate to break ground. What stops them from saying, actually, market conditions changed. We won't sign the final contract unless you increase our fee by 20%, or simply getting cold feet and walking away entirely?
Oh, wow. If they do that, the entire year-long tendering process just collapses. You have to start from scratch, which is politically humiliating and financially devastating.
Exactly.
So how does the tender guarantee actually prevent that? How do you enforce a penalty on a corporation headquartered halfway across the world without spending 10 years in an international trade court?
By controlling the geography of the money. The tender guarantee isn't just a promise. The bidding company must place those funds in a local bank within the purchaser's country, or secure an irrevocable letter of credit that the purchaser can access instantly.
Ah, I see.
If the contractor wins the bid but refuses to sign the contract at the price they quoted, or if they attempt to withdraw their bid prematurely, The purchaser doesn't need to hire international lawyers. They simply walk down to the local bank and seize the funds without even having to prove a financial loss in court.
It is an immediate localized penalty. It forces the contractor to have serious skin in the game from day one, and it provides the purchaser with a liquid pool of cash to cover the immense costs of having to restart the whole tendering process.
It ensures that only contractors who are absolutely certain of their numbers and their commitment will enter the arena.
It's a brilliant system of checks and balances. So, looking at the entire architecture of this 1988 UNCITRAL guide, it provides a comprehensive roadmap for an inexperienced purchaser to survive a negotiation with a global giant.
It really does.
You insulate yourself from bias by mandating independent feasibility studies. You make a highly calculated choice between paying the massive premium for the safety of a product-in-hand contract or absorbing the terrifying coordination risks of several contracts to protect your foreign exchange reserves.
Right.
And finally, you lock in contractors and enforce honesty in the bidding process using pre-qualification, the psychological barrier of the two-envelope system, and the financial hostage of the tender guarantee.
It is entirely about engineering a legal framework where the contractor's most profitable path is also the path that delivers the highest quality project to the purchaser.
And identifying where the hidden risks lie and writing contracts that align financial incentives to manage those risks is a completely universal discipline. Whether you are a government minister building a refinery, a business owner negotiating a corporate merger, or just someone hiring contractors for a personal project.
Which brings up a really fascinating contrast with how we operate today. Woven deeply into every chapter of this 1988 text is an absolute obsession with the transfer of technology.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal for these developing nations was self-sufficiency. They demanded product-in-hand contracts and joint ventures because they wanted their own personnel to learn how the machines worked, so they would eventually never need the foreign contractor again. They wanted to own the means of production.
Right. They wanted to learn the recipe, not just buy the cake.
Yes, but look at our modern digital economy. We have almost entirely abandoned the demand for technology transfer. When companies and even governments adopt new enterprise software or AI algorithms today, they don't demand to understand the underlying code.
No, not at all.
They sign contracts where they merely rent access to a black box in the cloud via a monthly subscription. We have traded the hard-won independence of the 1980s industrial mindset for the convenience of modern software as a service. And it leaves our institutions permanently dependent on a handful of tech monopolies just to keep the lights on.
We've gone from demanding the keys to the factory to just renting the output. If we applied the rigorous, independence-focused mindset of this 1988 UN legal guide to our modern digital infrastructure, insisting that vendors actually teach us how to manage and run these technologies ourselves, we might be building a vastly more resilient and self-sufficient society.
Absolutely.
Something to think about the next time you blindly click agree on a perpetual software subscription.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.